We're going to shift focus for now. Earlier today, the IMF board approved Sri Lankan government's request for a $2.9 billion bailout. The program will enable the country to access up to $7 billion in overall funding. This clears the way for release of funds and kick off a 4-year program designed to shore up the country's economy. The decision will allow an immediate disbursement of about $333 million, the IMF said, and will spur financial support from other partners as well, potentially helping Sri Lanka emerge from its worst financial crisis in decades. Okay, joining us at this point in time is Rohan Samarajiva, our founding chair of Learn Asia. Also joining me in the newsroom is my colleague Rakesh Kar. I want to come to you first, Rohan. What took IMF 1 year to release the relief package?
Well, we went to the IMF in, my recollection is March, April. Things were very rough here. We had changes in prime ministers, changes in presidents, all kinds of things. We got really serious about this in September 1, when the staff level agreement was reached and published. So from then it was about 200 days, which was, in my opinion, quite a long time. The sticking point, as many people know, was the Chinese letter of credible and specific assurances. Now, when we finally got that, within 2 or 3 days, it went to the executive board.
Okay. I want to come to you, Rakesh, at this point in time. Explain to us what really happened with Sri Lankan economy there.
Well, I mean, first of all, I think the good news is that the bailout has been, so to say, approved, but it has to be put in context. As our colleague from Sri Lanka mentioned, it's been very rough in the last few months for the Sri Lankan economy, and the government there is partly to blame. In fact, actually wholly to blame, because the default has happened, and default is unprecedented in recent times. And we must note that the current bailout that has happened, that's the good news. The bad news is that it's come with a lot of riders, and those riders are not easy to navigate given the current situation in Sri Lanka, which has improved in terms of the citizen engagement and overall governance factors. The caveats are so strong. For the first time, I imagine that IMF has said that this is conditional to the fact that there is no corruption in the country, which in itself I think is unprecedented, because IMF asking for a guarantee on a corruption-free environment to ensure that this bailout is administered over the next few years is so difficult to enforce. I really don't know how IMF is going to enforce that particular caveat. And the second one is again very tricky from the policy framework. IMF says that it has to be followed by what we call stringent tax reforms. And inherent to tax reforms, which were, so to say, tried and aborted, was the fact that you have to be tough and do away with the subsidies, which angers an already irritated and aggravated population. So in that sense, the good news is that it has happened, and it raises hopes of financial stability in the region. But adhering and managing this particular piece for the Sri Lankan government is not going to be easy, because I don't know how they're going to hold that promise of no corruption. And also, most importantly, if they really embark on the path of reforms, especially in taxation, then again, engaging with the citizenry meaningfully without them getting absolutely unhappy with the diktat is not going to be easy. And as it is, the timeline for the Sri Lankan economy to completely move away from the default situation is said to be, on a positive estimate, 2026. So that's how we are placed. But on the interesting part is, with all these caveats, with all these challenges, this has happened. It has taken so long, and there is some amount of equanimity between the IMF and the Sri Lankan government. And so there is a trajectory that we can follow. For me and for India, I think particularly, the good thing is that Sri Lanka has been extremely positive about India's support. But we couldn't have engineered the IMF bail-in. What we did, we supported them independently, and they have put on record India's support. The good thing possibly with the IMF bailout is that Sri Lanka will slowly but surely, to my mind, and hopefully for India and the environment, move out of the debt virus that possibly China got it into.
Okay. We'll talk about the role of China, but it's going to be a difficult and long road ahead. Yes, please, Rohan.
I need to correct something. The IMF conditionalities do not say you have to get rid of corruption. What it says is that there has to be a anti-corruption diagnostic, and that anti-corruption measures have to be taken. I have studied this and I have actually read the act. So the law, we had an anti-corruption law which had been completely drafted by 2019, and then it had been put in the deep freezer. So that law is coming in the next 2 weeks. So that is the kind of provisions we are talking about. We are not talking about somebody having to say we are not we assure you there is zero corruption.
As regards the law that you mentioned, I'm happy that it's coming. But the matter of the fact is that for the first time in an Asian economy has been, so to say, there's a judgmental perspective from IMF when it says that we're going to run a government diagnostic, kit on Sri Lankan economy. That's the wording that's there in the statement issued by IMF today.
We welcome that. Actually, these were things that we were doing on our own. And to have the backing of the IMF on this matter is perfectly all right with us.
Yeah, absolutely. We are also in sync with Sri Lankan getting faster than expected on track in terms of its economic growth. And it makes sense for the entire region to be economically independent. And ideally, we should not have any bailout required for any of the countries in the region. And I think India has stated...
These kinds of diagnostics have been done in Africa.
It's the first Asian economy to undergo that diagnostic. Yeah, and I'm hoping that sooner than later this diagnostic, is removed, given the overall commitment of the Sri Lankan people, the citizenry, and the government to try and get back on track.
Not a vindication of how good or how far the country has progressed, but I also want to bring in China at this point in time, because China has played a big role in rebuilding the island nation. How do you see relationship with China progressing, as China being your biggest bilateral lender at this point?
I think it's a central relationship. I think we need to look after it. I think we need to nurture it. In my view, you see, I am of the opinion that it's our politicians, our government decision makers who decided to take some of these ill-considered loans. So nobody came and held a gun to our heads and said, take this money. We took this money. So I think now we are putting in precautions, we are putting in safeguards about feasibility studies and things of that nature. And I think we need to be responsible for our actions. And I think we need to work with China to make sure that we work out a solution on the debt that we have taken in the past.
Couple of points, right there on the ground, you're there, what is the kind of messaging you're getting? Is the citizenry, how is it looking at this bailout that has come out today? And is it convinced of the government's efforts to try and, rid itself from all practices that it's alleged to have committed in the recent past?
Well, look, the three key factors about one of the causes, right? So our fuel supply has been now on a formula. There's no more government subsidies on diesel or petrol. It's expensive, doubled in price. Household cooking gas is no longer subsidized. It's also expensive, but it's available, right? And then, so that has been done, and there's no fuss about that. Then electricity prices have gone up, according to one calculation, by 66%, right? Electricity prices did not change from 2013. So for 10 years, they were static. And now they have gone up by 66% in a few months. So because of this, the pressures on the government, the exchequer, the fiscal pressures have been lessened. Taxes have been basically restored to 2019 levels because we had a radical cut in taxes in 2019. All that has been reversed. Now, of course, the difference is that in 2019, we had a much better economy when these levels of taxes were in play. Now we have people who are hit by inflation, increased fuel prices, increased electricity prices, increased water prices, etc. So this is really hard on people, right? There's no doubt about how hard this is. But the government is holding the line. I personally was not optimistic that they would be able to hold the line, but they're holding the line, right? So I think that if we get over these next few months, we have a very good chance of executing the remaining conditionalities. These were all pre-conditions, right? We fill these things and therefore we got the money.
Good. I think, with the IMF bailout announced today, the government has a great opportunity to go to the people and say that, we are on track and the world is looking at us in that perspective. It's not just the Sri Lankan government which is saying that we're getting on track. You mentioned China as being, supportive, and India also has played its part. How do you look at, Indian support in terms of financial matters and economic matters going forward with the, the package having been announced today by IMF?
I think there's almost universal appreciation of the critical role that India played in helping us get over the hardest time periods. And I think there has been a strategic plan to handle the Sri Lanka-India economic relationships. And that plan is being activated and implemented, particularly in areas such as energy and investments and so on. I personally have been involved in the negotiations with India on trade from 20 years ago, and we were having all kinds of resistance to that. I believe that finally that resistance has been dissolved, and we will move forward with a trade agreement. So in my view, I think the whole relationship with India has never been stronger as it is now. And we need to build on that. We need trust building measures on both sides. And we are, of course, the president has said, and I personally will say from my behalf, we are grateful.
Okay. Rohan, before I let you go, just one last quick question. What are the key economic growth drivers that the country is looking at this point in time? What are your challenge areas, and what exactly is the government's focus areas?
Growth. We need to get to growth. But remember, we have a whole series of things to do before we get to growth. We are still in a contracting economy, right? So we need to get out of the contracting economy and we need to start expanding. And the good signs that we see right now is tourism is coming back, remittances are coming back. I've been told that even the IT, BPO sector, the revenues are on the upswing, even though we were very worried because of the brain drain that would be a difficult area to get back to normal. But we need to get everything going, We need to do exports. There's no ifs and buts about it. And we need to diversify our exports because we can't be cutting imports. We need to expand on the export side. That is where the trade agreements, there are 3 trade agreements being negotiated. One with India, which is the very first agreement that we had, which is this about expanding that agreement. One with China, and I think there are some very interesting and useful synergies between the two. And a third with Taiwan, with Thailand. We already have one with Singapore that has been activated. So in order to get those opportunities, realize those opportunities, what we need is, we need our industry to be free of the 30% interest rates that we are suffering from right now. 30%. You can't do business when you have to pay 30% on your working capital. So that is the part of the recovery that we are really focusing on.